The receipt slips from her coat pocket as Caleb hangs it in the hallway, Olivia's handwriting on the back noting same table next week. His weathered fingers tremble, recognizing the restaurant name, the one she dismissed as too pretentious when he suggested it for their anniversary. 35 years of marriage crystallize into this moment of betrayal. In his study, surrounded by psychology books bearing his name, the grandfather clock's steady ticking mocks his suddenly erratic heartbeat. The first tear falls, catching in day-old stubble as coffee grows cold beside him. The rain against windows echoes his quiet sobs as he studies the evidence of deception. Have you felt that moment when trust shatters? Share your story below. Like if this betrayal resonates, follow to see how Caleb reclaims his dignity from heartbreak's ashes. In his trembling hand, a lifetime together suddenly feels like a stranger's story. The receipt slipped from her coat pocket as Caleb hung it in the hallway, Olivia's handwriting on the back noting same table next week. His weathered fingers trembled, recognizing the restaurant name, the one she'd dismissed as too pretentious when he'd suggested it for their anniversary last month. He made his way to his study, legs suddenly unreliable beneath him. Caleb sank into the leather chair worn smooth at the armrests from decades of contemplation. The grandfather clock's steady ticking seemed to mock his suddenly erratic heartbeat. Evening light faded through the windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors as he held the receipt under his desk lamp. Rain began tapping against the glass, a gentle rhythm that seemed to echo the first tears threatening to fall. Must be some explanation, he thought, his psychology professor's mind attempting rationality even as his husband's heart recognized the truth. He removed his reading glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. 35 years of marriage crystallized into this single moment of doubt. The shelf of psychology texts bearing his name, respected works on human behavior and relationship patterns, seemed to taunt him now. How had he missed the signs in his own home? The first tear escaped, tracking down his weathered cheek and catching in day-old stubble. His hand trembled as he checked the date on the receipt. Last Thursday, when Olivia had claimed to be at her book club. The same evening she'd returned home with that unfamiliar scent clinging faintly to her clothes. He'd noticed, but hadn't questioned. Now that hesitation felt like a betrayal of his own instincts. "This can't be right," he whispered, voice cracking on the final word despite decades of lecture hall projection. The family photo on his desk caught his eye. Olivia and him at their 30th anniversary. Both smiling with the easy comfort of a lifetime shared. Had that been real? The sob that escaped surprised him with its intensity, and he pressed his fist against his mouth to stifle it. The psychology professor, expert in human behavior, caught in the most human moment of blind trust. He opened his desk drawer, placing the receipt carefully inside beside the leather-bound journal where he'd noted other inconsistencies without acknowledging their pattern. The pipe tobacco scent, lingering though he'd quit years ago, reminded him of simpler times when evening conversations with Olivia had been their favorite part of the day. When had those stopped? His tear-blurred gaze fell on his calendar, where he methodically tracked appointments. Next Thursday was marked with another book club night. Caleb reached for his phone, noticing 3 missed calls from Thomas, unusual for his punctual friend who never called without purpose. His finger hovered over the callback button, then hesitated. What did Thomas know that he didn't? The thought sent another tear down his cheek. A soft knock at the front door startled him from his thoughts. He wiped his face quickly, professional composure returning automatically. Friend or foe at the door. In this moment, he wasn't sure he could tell the difference anymore. Morning light streamed through kitchen windows. Caleb had meticulously cleaned last weekend, an act of routine maintenance that now felt pointless. He watched Olivia humming as she prepared coffee, her movements familiar yet suddenly foreign. She poured into their matching anniversary mugs, sliding his across the counter with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Sleep well?" she asked, checking her phone for the third time since entering the kitchen. "Well enough." Caleb cupped the warm mug between his palms, studying her with new awareness. The receipt he'd found last night sat heavy in his pocket, a weight against his thigh. "I was thinking about trying that new restaurant downtown. What was it called? Bella Notte?" The coffee cup paused halfway to her lips. A flicker of panic crossed her features before smoothing into casual indifference. "Oh, that place. The girls tried it last month. Overpriced for what it is." "The girls loved it," she added too brightly, not meeting his eyes as she checked her phone again. Caleb nodded slowly, the confirmation settling like stone in his stomach. The restaurant name on the receipt had indeed been Bella Notte, not some place the girls had visited, but where Olivia had written "same table next week" in her distinctive handwriting. He sipped his coffee, finding it suddenly bitter. Decades of honest conversations had happened at this table: tenure celebrations, retirement planning, grandchildren announcements from friends. Now each memory seemed tainted, retroactively questioned by this new reality. His reflection caught in the window showed shoulders slightly hunched, face suddenly older than yesterday's. "I've got that faculty lunch today," he said, voice steady despite the turmoil beneath. "Might be late. Take your time. Book club tonight, so I'll be out anyway." She rinsed her cup, wedding ring glinting under the faucet's stream, twisting it absently with her thumb, a nervous habit he'd observed in his research subjects when fabricating stories. The psychology professor in him catalogued the signs: defensive body language, averted gaze, unnecessary details volunteered. The husband in him felt nauseated. "Have fun," he managed, watching her leave the kitchen. When the front door closed, Caleb moved to his study with purpose. The shared calendar on his desk confirmed what he already suspected: a pattern of book club entries on Thursday evenings, coinciding with her returning home with that unfamiliar cologne scent. He flipped back through months of entries, seeing the pattern emerge with academic clarity. Reaching for her forgotten phone charger, a text notification illuminated her screen. Caleb froze, not intending to pry until he saw the preview. "Looking forward to Thursday. Our table." The message disappeared before he could read more. When he tried to open it, a password prompt appeared: new security on a device they'd always left open to each other. "When did we start having secrets?" he whispered to the empty room, the question extending beyond the phone to their entire marriage. His hand trembled again, but this time not with shock, with recognition. The tears that threatened now were different from last night's, burning with the particular humiliation of a man who'd spent his career studying human behavior, yet had missed the signs in his own home. The maitre d' at Bella Notte recognized Olivia's name immediately. "Ah, yes, Mrs. Turner." "Would you prefer her usual table by the window?" he asked, gesturing toward an intimate corner partially hidden by decorative screens. "That would be perfect," Caleb replied, professional calm masking inner turmoil. He'd decided on this direct approach after a restless night analyzing possibilities. Once seated, he noted the table offered a view of the street, while remaining discreet from other diners. Strategic, not a place for a casual gathering of women from book club. "Your wife's companion isn't joining today?" the server asked while pouring water. Caleb's hand stilled. "Not today. Has she been coming here often?" every Thursday for about 2 months, always with the same gentleman, blue eyes, younger. They seemed quite engaged in conversation. The server's diplomatic phrasing couldn't disguise the implication. "Thank you." Caleb left his water untouched, departing after leaving enough cash to cover the inconvenience. His research methodology had yielded clearer results than he'd hoped for. The park where he and Olivia had once spent Sunday afternoons in early marriage lay 3 blocks away. His feet carried him there without conscious decision, to the secluded bench where he'd proposed 35 years ago. Now weathered and partially overgrown with ivy, their carved initials remained visible, though faded. C+O, surrounded by a heart they'd recarved on their 25th anniversary. Caleb traced the letters with his weathered fingertip, nail-catching on the deepened O from that recommitment day. The irony wasn't lost on him. 35 years, he whispered to the empty space beside him, voice hollow with disbelief, yet tinged with analytical curiosity. How had it come to this? When had he become invisible to her? The psychology professor in him understood the statistical patterns of long-term relationships, the vulnerability points, the signs of wandering attention. He'd published papers on these very topics, counseled couples through similar crises. Yet theory and practice stood worlds apart as tears silently tracked down his cheeks. An elderly couple walked hand in hand along the path ahead, their comfortable synchronicity a painful contrast to his situation. The woman laughed at something her companion said, leaning into him with the easy affection of decades shared. Caleb looked away, the simple scene suddenly unbearable. His professional mind began categorizing observations methodically, the familiar academic process providing strange comfort. 2 months of Thursday book clubs. A younger man. Deliberate deception rather than a spontaneous indiscretion. The restaurant she'd refused to try with him, but now frequented with another. The password-protected phone. Each piece fitting together with undeniable clarity. He could confront her immediately with this evidence. That would be the expected response. Emotional, reactive, perhaps even satisfying in the moment. But decades of studying human behavior suggested a different approach. Observation before action. Complete data before conclusions. Wiping his tears with a handkerchief, Caleb straightened his posture. The professional demeanor that had momentarily abandoned him returned as he began mentally organizing his investigation approach. He would proceed with methodical precision rather than emotional reaction. His expertise, seemingly useless in preventing the situation, might yet guide him through it. A familiar SUV caught his peripheral vision driving past the park entrance. Thomas's vehicle, with Olivia in the passenger seat, engaged in animated conversation, his best friend and his wife deep in discussion that clearly excluded him. Caleb's breath caught. What connection existed between them that he wasn't privy to? Confidant or co-conspirator? The second potential betrayal settled alongside the first, compounding his sudden isolation. For a man who had spent his life understanding others, he'd never felt more misunderstood or more alone. "Going fishing with Thomas today," Caleb announced casually over breakfast, watching Olivia's reaction with the detached precision he'd once reserved for research subjects. Relief flickered across her features before she composed herself. "That's nice, dear. You two haven't gone in weeks." "Thought it was time to reconnect," he replied, noting how she checked her phone with poorly disguised eagerness. The bait had been set, and she'd taken it without hesitation. Instead of heading to the lake with fishing gear loaded in his trunk, Caleb drove downtown and parked his sedan where it offered a clear view of Bellanote's entrance while remaining inconspicuous. The academic in him appreciated the methodical approach to data collection. The husband in him felt hollow at the necessity. At precisely 10:15 a.m., Olivia arrived, dressed more carefully than she had been for their anniversary dinner last month. She checked her reflection in the restaurant window, adjusting her hair in a gesture he'd seen countless times throughout their marriage, a gesture now performed for someone else. 11 minutes later, a man approached, tall, blue-eyed, perhaps 15 years younger than Caleb. Adrian, he presumed, recalling Olivia mentioning a new colleague with that name months ago. The greeting between them was brief but telling, her hand lingering on his arm, their bodies leaning toward each other with unmistakable familiarity. Caleb's white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel tightened as he watched them enter the restaurant, seated at what the maitre d' had called their usual table. Through the large windows, he observed their interaction, intimate conversation, her animated expressions, their hands touching across the table, and finally, a brief kiss that removed any possibility of innocent explanation. A choked sob escaped despite his hand pressed against his mouth. His shoulders shook with suppressed rage and grief as decades of professional control crumbled beneath personal betrayal. The psychology professor, expert in relationship dynamics, reduced to a cliché. The oblivious husband watching his wife's infidelity unfold in real time. Rain began to fall, streaking the windshield and blurring his view, mirroring the tears tracking down his face. He started the engine, driving aimlessly until he found himself at the fishing dock where he and Thomas had spent countless Saturday mornings for 20 years. As if summoned by the thought, Thomas's SUV was already parked there, its owner arranging tackle boxes with familiar precision. Seeing Caleb approach alone, Thomas straightened, surprise evident. "Thought you couldn't make it today," Thomas said, avoiding direct eye contact. "Interesting assumption, since I told Olivia I was meeting you here." Caleb's voice remained steady, despite the storm raging within. "Just as interesting as seeing you driving with my wife yesterday." Thomas paled, setting down the fishing lure with uncharacteristic clumsiness. "Caleb, it's not what you think." "Then enlighten me." The academic tone Caleb had perfected through decades of lectures cut through the lakeside quiet. "Explain why my best friend has been secretly meeting with my wife, particularly in light of her ongoing affair with her colleague Adrian." The shock on Thomas's face confirmed at least partial ignorance. "Affair? She said you two were having difficulties, that you were distant, absorbed in your books and theories. She asked for advice on reconnecting with you." While disconnecting with her lover every Thursday at Bellanote. Caleb's laugh held no humor. "I've just come from watching them together. Rather conclusive research findings." Thomas sank onto the dock bench, genuine distress evident. "I didn't know about Adrian. She's been talking to me for weeks about feeling invisible to you. I've been counseling her on how to approach you, how to revitalize your marriage." Without once mentioning these conversations to me. The betrayal reflected in the rippling water between them, fishing poles untouched for the first time in their 20-year ritual. "You chose sides without hearing mine." "I was trying to help you both," Thomas defended weakly. "She said you'd dismiss her feelings if confronted directly, that your professional ego makes personal criticism impossible for you to hear." The accusation stung with its kernel of potential truth. Had he been dismissive? Unavailable? The questions pierced his certainty briefly before the image of Olivia kissing Adrian reasserted itself. "She's confused, Caleb," Thomas continued. "She says you've been distant for years, too absorbed in your books and theories to see her needs. Tears of rage welled as Caleb processed this second betrayal. Not just his wife's infidelity, but his best friend's willingness to believe the worst of him without question. The foundation of his personal life crumbling simultaneously from multiple directions. How could you? The question directed at both Olivia through memory and Thomas in person, his voice breaking differently with each. Betrayal versus disappointment. Two relationships spanning decades, both revealed as fundamentally misunderstood. Thomas reached toward him, but Caleb stepped back, maintaining physical distance that mirrored his emotional withdrawal. His professional identity as behavior expert completely undermined by personal blindness and friends' deception. His entire social reality suddenly questionable. "I thought I knew you both," Caleb said finally, turning to leave. The rain intensified, but he barely noticed, the external storm insignificant compared to the one within. Caleb spread his notes across his study desk, approaching the situation with academic methodology despite his inner turmoil. He documented the timeline methodically, book club alibis, calendar patterns, observed behaviors, each entry damning in its precision. Yet when he attempted to find earlier warning signs, the record proved frustratingly sparse. Had Olivia covered her tracks that expertly, or had he truly been too absorbed in his work to notice? The question haunted him as he reviewed their shared calendar from months past. Her deception showed sophistication that suggested practice, or perhaps she'd simply applied techniques she'd learned from his own lectures over the years. The irony wasn't lost on him. The community center bridge game that evening provided his first taste of social fallout. Conversations dimmed as he entered, resuming with artificial brightness after awkward acknowledgments. Mark and Janet Harrison, dinner companions for 15 years, suddenly found the refreshment table fascinating when he approached. Others managed brief, pitying smiles before finding urgent reasons to be elsewhere. "Working late tonight, Olivia?" Mrs. Pemberton asked with exaggerated casualness when he sat alone. "Book club," Caleb replied, watching understanding flash across her features. The lie had clearly become community knowledge, though its nature remained selectively interpreted. The monthly dinner party at the Richardsons' the following evening confirmed his suspicions. As a couple who'd hosted their friends religiously for 20 years, Alan and Susan Richardson had always set their table with careful attention to established dynamics. Tonight, Caleb immediately noticed the altered arrangement. He approached his usual place to find it occupied by David Wilson, a casual acquaintance previously seated at the far end. "Sorry, Caleb. Susan asked me to switch tonight," David explained with uncomfortable deference. From across the room, Olivia held court, her animated gestures drawing appreciative laughter from a circle that included Thomas. Their easy camaraderie suggested a narrative already established, one casting Caleb as antagonist rather than victim. He caught fragments as he circulated the periphery, wineglass untouched in his hand. Midlife awakening, finally pursuing her passions. Controlling, always analyzing everyone. Devoted his life to studying relationships, but couldn't maintain his own. The last comment, from someone he'd counseled through their own marital difficulties, landed with particular sting. His professional reputation weaponized against his personal dignity. Excusing himself to the bathroom, Caleb leaned heavily on the sink, staring at his unfamiliar reflection in harsh light. Tears flowed freely as he whispered, "Who am I now?" to the mirror, hands trembling uncontrollably. The psychology professor's mask completely shattered in this moment of private despair. Decades of professional respect, community standing, and personal relationships, all apparently contingent on Olivia's narrative rather than his own actions. The revelation of how thoroughly she'd managed perceptions around them left him breathless with its calculated efficiency. He straightened his tie with unsteady fingers, attempting to restore dignity while evidence of tears remained. Taking measured breaths, he composed himself with techniques he'd taught countless patients. The irony twisted in him like a knife. Returning to the gathering, he found conversation flowing seamlessly around his absence. His chair remained occupied, his presence unremarked, his isolation complete despite the crowded room. Thomas briefly met his gaze before looking away, the final confirmation of friendship's end, adding fresh weight to his shoulders. Olivia caught his eye across the room, her performance faltering momentarily before she turned back to her audience with renewed animation. Even in that brief connection, Caleb saw calculation rather than remorse. The professional detachment he'd cultivated through decades of clinical practice abandoned him entirely. For the first time since confirmation of her affair, he felt the full, devastating emotional impact of not just betrayal, but erasure, from his marriage, his friendships, his community, and his professional identity. Standing with untouched wine, watching the social fabric he'd thought himself integral to function perfectly without him, Caleb experienced the particular desolation of discovering one's expendability late in life. When he finally left, no one seemed to notice his departure. Olivia remained behind, her laughter following him into the night as he drove home alone, the car radio accidentally catching a love song that mocked his situation with its promises of eternal devotion. Passing downtown, a softly lit storefront caught his attention. Marie Chen Photography, classes welcome, illuminated against the darkening street. Through tears, he recognized the name from graduate school, a contemporary who'd chosen art over academia when their paths had diverged 30 years ago. Could there be a life beyond the one crumbling around him? A connection untainted by current betrayal? The possibility offered the first faint glimmer in days of overwhelming darkness. Has betrayal left you standing alone while everyone believed the lie? Comment your story below, like if this pain feels familiar, and follow to see how Caleb finds strength in his darkest hour. The gallery door chimed softly as Caleb entered the next morning, earlier than the posted opening time. The space smelled of paper and chemicals, oddly comforting in their familiarity from his college darkroom days. Light streamed through skylights, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like suspended moments of time. "We're not quite open yet," called a voice from the back before a woman emerged, wiping hands on a cloth. She stopped, recognition dawning slowly. Caleb Turner. My goodness, it's been what, 30 years? Marie Chen hadn't changed as much as transformed. Her once black hair now silver, but cut in the same sharp bob, laugh lines deepening the eyes that had always noticed too much. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd found her place in the world. Marie. His voice cracked slightly. I saw your sign last night. I didn't realize you'd settled here. 10 years now. She studied him with the direct gaze he remembered. No social niceties masking her assessment. You look terrible, Caleb. A surprised laugh escaped him, the first genuine reaction he'd experienced in days, always refreshingly honest. Photography requires seeing what's actually there, not what you wish to see. She gestured to a chair near the counter. Coffee? You look like you could use some. As she poured from a thermos, Caleb found himself explaining his presence without intending to. Not the affair, not the betrayals, but the simpler truth. I used to love photography, before psychology took over. Marie nodded, unsurprised. You had a good eye. I remember that series on elderly hands you did in undergrad. Showed dignity in aging before that was fashionable. You remember that? The idea that this part of himself had been noticed and valued by someone outside his current crisis felt strangely validating. I keep class sizes small. Next one starts in an hour. She slid a brochure across the counter. No pressure, but sometimes returning to old passions helps navigate new realities. Her careful phrasing told Caleb she saw more than he was saying. The photography class information detailed a 6-week course focused on finding beauty in weathered subjects, almost eerily aligned with his current need. I'll stay, he decided, a spontaneity foreign to his carefully structured life. When other students arrived, mostly retirees with varying experience levels, Caleb found himself absorbing technical information with academic precision while experiencing emotional release through the viewfinder. His hands initially shook, adjusting the vintage camera settings, but muscle memory returned as he focused on composition rather than crisis. Later, watching his first print emerge in the developing tray, Caleb experienced a moment of pure focus, unmarred by recent events. The image, a weathered park bench seen through rain-spattered glass, held metaphorical significance he hadn't consciously intended. Marie nodded approvingly. You still have the eye, she commented, assessing the print's composition. Most people photograph objects. You capture stories. By afternoon, Caleb had signed up for the full course and purchased a used camera that felt right in his hands. Solid, reliable, uncomplicated by deception. The simple act of carrying it changed his posture as he left the gallery, his gaze already seeking compositions in ordinary scenes he'd passed unseeing for years. That evening, he called the lawyer, whose card had sat in his desk drawer since a colleague's divorce last year. The conversation was brief, factual, devoid of the emotional overflow he'd feared. His academic precision served him well as he outlined the situation, focusing on practical considerations rather than betrayal's pain. I'll have preliminary papers drawn up by Thursday, the lawyer confirmed. You're certain about this direct approach without prior counseling attempts? Yes, Caleb replied, surprising himself with his certainty. The decision, crystallizing through the day of photography, felt right in its clarity. He chose not to mention that the marriage's opposing party was already receiving unauthorized counseling from his former best friend. When Olivia returned home that evening, Caleb was reviewing his photographs at the dining table. She paused, clearly surprised by the camera equipment. Photography? That's new. Her tone suggested the hobby's inexplicability rather than interest. Actually, it's quite old, from before we met. He continued sorting prints, maintaining casual conversation while observing her with new clarity. How was your day? Fine. Listen, Caleb. She set her bag down with deliberate care. I've been thinking, we need some space from each other, just temporarily. He looked up, meeting her gaze steadily. Space? I'm going to stay with Karen for a week. She named a friend he'd never particularly trusted. I think it will help us appreciate each other more. Sometimes people need distance to see what they have. The manipulation tactic was so transparent he almost laughed, creating absence to manufacture pursuit, attempting to position her affair-driven departure as therapeutic for their marriage. He recognized the technique from his second book on relationship dynamics. Perhaps you're right, he replied mildly, returning to his photographs. His calm acceptance clearly unsettled her expected script. You're okay with this? I think clarity would benefit us both. He smiled slightly. When are you thinking of leaving? Tomorrow morning. She studied him with confusion that might have been comical under different circumstances. I'll pack tonight. Caleb helped carry her suitcase downstairs later, his movements measured and courteous. The domestic routine they'd perfected through decades continued its choreography while its foundation had already crumbled. You'll see things differently when I return, she promised at the door, her confidence in her strategy evident in her tone. I'm sure things will be different, he agreed, the double meaning completely lost on her as she kissed his cheek perfunctorily. As her car pulled away, Caleb felt an unexpected lightness. The decision to end their marriage brought neither joy nor additional pain, only the clean relief of choosing clarity over chaos, truth over comfortable deception. He returned to his photographs, hands steady as he selected images for the portfolio Marie had suggested he begin. The camera captured reality without embellishment or manipulation, a refreshing contrast to the distorted reflections his marriage had become. Standing at your own crossroads between painful truth and comfortable lies. Comment your moment of decision. Like if you're cheering for Caleb's quiet strength, follow for the powerful aftermath of choosing yourself. Olivia's key turned in the lock precisely 1 week later, her footsteps lighter than when she'd left. Caleb had spent the intervening days in careful preparation, legal consultation, photography development, and the quiet reordering of his internal world. He sat at the dining table, 2 water glasses filled, papers centered with academic precision. Caleb? She called, sounding almost girlish. I'm home. In the dining room, he replied, voice steady. She appeared in the doorway, momentarily backlit, before stepping into the room. Her expression shifted from anticipation to confusion as she registered the formal tableau. What's all this? The question held nervous laughter as she set her bag down. Please sit. Caleb gestured to the chair across from him, her usual place through countless meals and conversations. We need to talk. She complied, wariness replacing her initial confidence. Her eyes fell to the documents centered between them, comprehension dawning slowly as she recognized legal letterhead. Divorce papers? The words emerged as shocked whisper. This is a joke, right? Some kind of power play because I took some space? No joke, Olivia. Caleb maintained eye contact, decades of lecture hall projection keeping his voice clear despite the emotion beneath. I've had time to consider our situation with clarity. Our situation? Her tone shifted to defensive indignation. Taking a week to think about our marriage doesn't warrant this. Your affair with Adrian warrants this. The direct statement hung in the air between them, undeniable in its simplicity. Color drained from her face, quickly replaced by flush. What are you talking about? What has Thomas been saying? Thomas confirmed what I'd already discovered independently. Caleb's professional detachment remained intact, despite the personal nature of his words. I've observed your Thursday pattern for weeks. I've visited Bellanote and spoken with staff who know your usual table. I've seen you together myself. A single tear tracked down his cheek, not in weakness but release as he continued. I choose clarity over chaos, Olivia. Truth over comfortable deception. Her strategy shifted visibly, shock giving way to practiced contrition. It was a mistake, Caleb. A moment of weakness. It didn't mean anything. 8 weeks of scheduled deception isn't a moment. He interrupted gently. Your relationship with Adrian isn't why I'm ending our marriage, though. It's the calculated manipulation of me, our friends, our entire community. You've rewritten our history to justify your choices. Tears welled in her eyes, real emotion finally breaking through performance. You've been distant for years, buried in your books and theories, analyzing everyone but never seeing me. What was I supposed to do? Speak truthfully. Or leave honorably. He slid the papers closer to her. Not construct elaborate deceptions while turning our friends against me. I never, she began, then stopped as he raised an eyebrow. Her phone chimed with an incoming text. Thomas's name appeared on the screen before she quickly silenced it. He's called 6 times since you arrived, Caleb noted. Your stories are aligning, I presume. Anger replaced tears as her last defenses crumbled. You're spying on me? Checking my phone? This is exactly why. I haven't touched your phone, Olivia. I simply observed the caller ID displayed on your screen. The psychology professor's precision undermined her attempted deflection. Observation isn't invasion, it's awareness. She stared at him, truly seeing him perhaps for the first time in years. Thomas said you'd never actually leave, that you needed me too much at your age. The statement held both accusation and dawning uncertainty. Caleb smiled sadly. There's another area where expertise failed both of you. He removed his wedding ring, placing it deliberately beside the papers. The indentation on his finger caught the afternoon light streaming through the window, visible evidence of the mark 35 years had left, even as he chose to move beyond it. I'll be staying with a colleague while you decide your next steps. The house is yours until we determine equitable division of assets. His calm practicality seemed to unsettle her more than recrimination would have. I've taken only my personal items and photography equipment. Photography? She repeated blankly, focusing on the unexpected detail. Since when do you? Since before I met you, he answered simply. There are many parts of myself I set aside during our marriage. I'm reclaiming them now. Standing, Caleb felt a strange lightness, despite the gravity of the moment. The confrontation he'd dreaded had brought neither satisfaction nor additional pain, only the clean certainty of choosing self-respect over a compromised relationship. As he moved toward the door where his suitcase waited, Olivia called after him, her voice smaller than he'd ever heard it. What am I supposed to do now? He turned back, seeing not the manipulator of recent weeks, but the woman he'd once built a life with. Whatever you choose, Olivia, but for the first time in 35 years, I won't be part of that equation. That's your freedom and mine. The door closed behind him with quiet finality, the sound of Olivia's first genuine sob following him down the steps. The tears that blurred his own vision as he placed his suitcase in the car weren't of regret or anger, but of release. The culmination of a journey from betrayal to clarity, from reaction to choice. The psychology professor had finally applied his expertise to his own life crisis, choosing dignity over desperation, truth over comfortable illusion. Marie's spare room above the gallery became Caleb's temporary sanctuary, minimalist, practical, and free from the weight of shared history. Afternoon light streamed through high windows as he arranged his sparse belongings, the space already feeling more authentic than the house he'd left behind. 6 weeks until your exhibition, Marie reminded him, leaning against the doorframe with characteristic directness. I've reserved the main wall. Your work deserves to be seen. Exhibition? Caleb paused, surprise evident. Marie, I've only just returned to photography after 30 years. And producing better work than most who've never stopped. She crossed her arms, brooking no argument. Your series on weathered objects showing beauty through damage, it resonates. People will connect with it. News of his separation spread through the community with predictable ripples. Former friends approached awkwardly at the grocery store, coffee shop, and community center, offering stilted sympathies that revealed Olivia's narrative was evolving again. The psychology professor observed these social dynamics with professional interest, now partially detached from personal pain. Thomas attempted reconciliation through an apologetic email that acknowledged his misguided loyalty, but stopped short of admitting complicity. Caleb responded with professional forgiveness and personal distance, a boundary that felt healthy rather than punitive. 3 weeks into his new arrangement, Caleb stood examining print selections for his exhibition when Marie called from downstairs. "Caleb, someone here to see you." He descended to find a young man, early 30s, tall, with familiar eyes, standing uncertainly in the gallery. Recognition dawned slowly, the resemblance unmistakable despite 3 decades of separation. "Daniel?" The name emerged as question, though Caleb knew with certainty this was his son from his brief first marriage, now a grown man he barely knew. "Hello, Father." Daniel's voice carried the same cadence as Caleb's own, academic and measured. "I found you through the gallery website. Your exhibition announcement." They stood in momentary silence, 30 years of absence stretching between them. Then Daniel reached into his messenger bag, withdrawing a stack of envelopes held together with a rubber band. "These were returned to me over the years." He handed them to Caleb, who immediately recognized his son's handwriting and Olivia's notation on each, "Return to sender. No longer at this address." Caleb's hand trembled as he examined the evidence of deliberate interference spanning decades. Letters addressed correctly to a home where he'd lived continuously for 30 years. Birthday cards, graduation announcements, wedding invitation. His entire relationship with his son systematically dismantled through simple postal deception. "She told me you didn't want contact," Daniel explained quietly, "that you'd requested privacy to focus on your new family." Tears welled and flowed freely as Caleb processed this deeper layer of betrayal, not just marital infidelity, but the calculated destruction of his relationship with his child. "I never knew these existed, Daniel. I would have—" Words failed as emotion overwhelmed academic precision. The 2 men moved toward each other simultaneously, embrace bridging decades of engineered separation. Gallery visitors discreetly averted their gazes from this raw display of recognition and loss. "I found your books in college," Daniel said when they finally separated, both wiping tears unabashedly. "Read everything you published." "I told myself it was academic interest, but—" "You were looking for me," Caleb finished, recognizing the motivation with painful clarity. They moved to the small cafe area, conversation flowing with surprising ease despite their history. Daniel had followed Caleb's academic path. Psychology professor at a small college on the coast, recently divorced himself. Father to a 7-year-old daughter Caleb hadn't known existed. "I've been afraid I was turning into the father I barely knew," Daniel admitted, studying his coffee. "Now I wonder if I've been more like you than I realized, for better and worse." Together, they viewed Caleb's photography exhibition preparations, the shared aesthetic perspective immediately evident in their observations. The hereditary connection Olivia had attempted to sever reasserted itself through mutual recognition of composition, light, and meaning. When Daniel finally prepared to leave, promising to return with his daughter the following weekend, the air between them had transformed from the weight of absence to the possibility of connection. "I saw her once," Daniel said at the door, hesitating. "Olivia, I came to your house about 5 years ago, but she answered. Said you were traveling and couldn't be disturbed. I left my number." "Which never reached me," Caleb concluded, the pattern familiar now. As his son departed with promises of return, Caleb stood watching until the car disappeared from view. The gallery space around him seemed suddenly charged with new significance, not just artistic renewal, but familial reconnection, legacy rediscovered through the very exhibition that marked his independence. That evening, as visitors gathered for a community art walk, Caleb noticed several former dinner party attendees entering the gallery, curiosity overcoming recent awkwardness. Marie had positioned his photograph of the weathered engagement bench prominently, its carved initials still visible despite surrounding decay, a testament to endurance amid breakdown. One by one, people who had avoided his gaze at the Richardson dinner approached with genuine interest in his work, conversations focusing on artistic merit rather than personal circumstances. The shifting social dynamics revealed how quickly narratives could evolve when new information emerged. Olivia's relationship with Adrian had apparently become public knowledge, prompting re-evaluation of earlier assumptions. Standing beside his photographs, explaining his artistic choices with the same clarity he'd once reserved for psychological theories, Caleb experienced the particular satisfaction of being seen for his present reality rather than through the distorting lens of others' narratives. The exhibition space transformed that night from Marie's gallery to a new beginning. Professional identity merging with artistic expression, paternal connection restored, and the first tentative rebuilding of community relationships on more authentic terms. When he returned upstairs late that evening, emotionally drained but peacefully centered, Caleb added a new photograph to his exhibition selections, his own hand and Daniel's side by side on the gallery counter, the physical resemblance striking in the black and white image. Beneath it, he wrote a simple title, Reconnection. The tears that fell as he worked weren't of loss but recognition, the profound emotion of finding unexpected gain amid betrayal's wreckage. 6 months later, Caleb stood on the porch of his new cottage, camera in hand, as evening light transformed ordinary scenes into moments worth preserving. The small house, just 3 blocks from Marie's gallery, had become home more quickly than he'd anticipated, its weathered wooden floors and abundant natural light perfect for both living and photography. He'd painted the porch himself, choosing a soft blue that brightened the weathered wood without disguising its character. Bird feeders attracted constant activity to the yard, providing both companionship and photographic subjects. The manuscript pages of his new book, Seeing Clearly, Visual Perception and Psychological Insight, rested on the side table beside an antique camera lens Daniel had given him, symbols of his merged professional and creative identities. Regular Sunday dinners with Daniel and his granddaughter Emma had become the framework around which his weeks were structured. At 7, Emma showed both her father's analytical mind and a creative intuition that delighted Caleb. Teaching her to use a simple camera had become their special connection, her perspective offering insights that frequently found their way into his lectures at the community college where he now taught part-time. The exhibition that had begun as Marie's insistence had led to unexpected opportunities, guest lectures on visual psychology, a small but dedicated following for his photographic work, and the book contract combining his academic expertise with his artistic renaissance. Life had reconfigured itself around authenticity rather than accommodation, purpose rather than pattern. "Professor Turner?" The voice startled him from contemplation. Thomas stood at the garden gate, uncertainty evident in his posture, the first in-person encounter since their confrontation at the fishing dock months earlier. "Thomas," Caleb set his camera down carefully. This is unexpected. I've driven by a few times, his former friend admitted. Never quite found the courage to stop. Caleb gestured to the second chair, an invitation neither effusive nor reluctant. Professional forgiveness had come easily. Personal trust would require more time. "How have you been?" Thomas asked, settling awkwardly into the seat. "Well, better than expected." Caleb's response held neither bitterness nor false cheer. "And you?" "Managing." Thomas glanced at the camera equipment. "Your exhibition was remarkable. I went twice, but kept missing you." The unspoken question hung between them, whether absence had been coincidence or choice. Caleb let it linger, neither confirming nor denying intention. "I saw Olivia last week," Thomas offered after a silence. "At the grocery store. She's different." "How so?" Genuine curiosity rather than emotional investment colored the question. "Subdued. Adrian's gone. Left for a position in Seattle. With someone else, apparently." Thomas studied his hands. "She asked about you." Caleb nodded, unsurprised. The patterns he'd studied professionally had played out with predictable precision in his personal life. "I hope she finds what she's looking for." The sentiment was genuine. Not forgiveness exactly, but the peaceful detachment that comes with complete emotional release. His wish for her well-being existed independently from their shared history, neither dependent on nor limited by past betrayal. Thomas departed after 20 minutes of careful conversation that acknowledged the breach without attempting to minimize it. The foundation for potential renewal had been established, though both recognized any future friendship would necessarily be different from its predecessor. 2 days later, the Community Arts Festival brought unexpected encounters, as Caleb displayed selected photographs in the park where he'd once sat, processing his discovery of Olivia's affair. The transformed space now held new associations, creativity, connection, forward movement. Midway through the afternoon, he spotted Olivia across the green, her appearance notably less vibrant than in memory. Their eyes met briefly, mutual recognition passing between them before she approached with careful steps. "Your work is beautiful," she offered, gesturing to the displayed photographs. "I didn't know you had this talent." "I did," Caleb replied simply. "Before." The unspoken remainder hung between them. Before psychology, before marriage, before priorities shifted to accommodate partnership. Her slight nod acknowledged understanding. "Are you well?" he asked, professional courtesy masking neither concern nor indifference. "Getting there." Her honesty seemed new, possibly hard-won. "Adrian left." "I heard. With his research assistant." A bitter smile flickered briefly. "Apparently I was too old for the long term." Caleb could have offered analysis, the predictable pattern of relationships founded on deception, the statistical likelihood of repetition. Instead, he simply nodded, allowing her the dignity of her own realizations. "Your son found you," she said after a moment, changing direction. "Daniel." "Yes." His tone cooled slightly, this wound still fresher than the marital betrayal. "I should have given you the letters." No excuse followed, just acknowledgement. "Yes, you should have." Caleb's response was neither accusatory nor forgiving, simply factual. They parted minutes later with civil nods, no dramatic confrontation or emotional catharsis marking their exchange. The mundane nature of their interaction somehow more definitive than any heated scene could have been. Two people who had shared decades now moving in separate orbits, the gravitational pull between them finally released. As twilight settled over the festival, Caleb returned to his porch, camera in hand, to capture the day's last light. Marie joined him briefly on her way home, their comfortable silence the product of mutual respect rather than romantic connection. "Teaching class Tuesday?" she asked, referencing the senior photography course he'd developed that had quickly filled with enthusiastic students. "Of course," he smiled, genuine pleasure evident. "I'm incorporating some perception exercises from my research. The intersection is fascinating." After she left, Caleb adjusted his camera to capture the sunset. Not directly, but reflected in his window glass, the indirect beauty holding deeper interest than the obvious spectacle. A peaceful tear tracked down his cheek as he reviewed the image, appreciation rather than grief evident in his expression. On his desk inside, Emma's first photograph sat framed beside his academic awards, a slightly blurry image of Caleb and Daniel in profile, their matching expressions capturing hereditary connection no separation could erase. Legacy continuing through unexpected channels, meaning found in places betrayal could not reach. As twilight deepened, he considered Marie's suggestion that he develop a specialized therapy approach combining visual expression with traditional psychological techniques. The possibility of helping others navigate their own crossroads between painful truth and comfortable illusion held particular appeal, his personal experience informing professional expertise in ways his previous academic detachment never could. The psychology professor, the photographer, the father, the grandfather. Facets once compartmentalized, now integrated into cohesive identity. The dignity of choosing clarity over chaos had yielded not just survival, but renewal, purpose extending beyond the horizon of betrayal into landscapes previously unimagined. Caleb Turner, watching stars emerge above his new home, found himself genuinely grateful for the painful awakening that had ultimately led not to an ending, but a more authentic beginning. When a receipt falls from a coat pocket or a text message appears at the wrong moment, life can change in an instant, can't it? The foundations we've built over decades, marriages, friendships, identities, suddenly reveal fault lines we never knew existed. You've been there, perhaps. That moment when certainty crumbles and tears fall. When the person you thought you knew becomes a stranger wearing a familiar face. Trust, once broken, leaves a particular wound for those of us who've traveled life's longer road. It's not just the betrayal that cuts deep. It's the retrospective doubt cast on years of shared memories. Was any of it real? The question haunts quiet evenings, doesn't it? When Caleb found himself standing alone at that dinner party, invisible in a room full of people who'd shared his table for decades, many of you recognized that particular desolation. The special sting of discovering your expendability after a lifetime of connection. But there's something else that happens in these moments of painful clarity. Something important. When the comfortable illusions fall away, we often rediscover parts of ourselves long set aside. The photographer before the husband, the writer before the caretaker, the dreamer before the provider. Like finding an old favorite sweater in the back of a closet and realizing it still fits perfectly. These passions don't vanish with time. They wait patiently for rediscovery, sometimes for decades. You know something that younger folks haven't learned yet. Life rarely ends where you expect it to. The chapter you thought was closing might actually be opening a door you'd forgotten existed. When Caleb found his son after 30 years of engineered separation, many of you felt that particular hope, that unexpected gifts sometimes emerge from our deepest losses. Legacy isn't just what's taken from us, but what we reclaim, rebuild, and discover anew. The dignity in choosing clarity over chaos, in standing firmly in your truth, when others have rewritten your story. There's a quiet power there that resonates differently after 60 years of living. It's not about winning or revenge. It's about the peace that comes from finally removing ill-fitting masks we've worn too long, even when that removal comes through tears. So tonight, as you sit on your own porch, watching the stars emerge, know this: the heart that's weathered storms has learned to recognize clearing skies. And sometimes, it takes a storm to reveal just how resilient we've become along the way.